Ever tried wiping with hay? How about a rock? Welcome to medieval hygiene, where wiping your butt was a daily gamble between discomfort and disease. Ever tried wiping with hay? How about a rock? Welcome to medieval hygiene, where wiping your butt was a daily gamble between discomfort and disease. If you've ever seen a castle wall with a strange little box sticking out high above the moat, that's not decoration, that's a toilet. The medieval garderobe was a narrow stone room with a wooden bench and a hole. Waste dropped straight down, often into a pit or the moat. In winter, the cold stone was unforgiving. In summer, the smell drifted back inside. As for wiping, nobles sometimes kept cloth rags near the seat, used, washed, and reused. Others left bundles of straw or moss tucked into corners. A handful of hay was common, and sometimes wiping meant grabbing whatever was handy, no questions asked. Garderobes weren't private, they echoed, and servants had to clean them. Imagine being assigned the job of scraping dried waste off castle walls or emptying the pit when it filled. Despite being advanced for the time, garderobes often backed up. Castles stank, disease spread. It wasn't unusual for a fine noble to catch something nasty while doing their business. Even behind thick stone walls, royalty couldn't escape one truth: medieval toilets were rough, and wiping was worse. Traveling in the Middle Ages wasn't glamorous. Roads were muddy, forests were wild, and toilets non-existent. If nature called, you went. In nature, behind a tree, by a stream, or in a roadside ditch. Travelers carried small satchels, and if they were wise, they packed wiping materials, linen rags, straw, or soft moss gathered on the way. Some even carried wooden sticks with cloth wrapped on the end, similar to monastic sponges. But most didn't plan ahead. So when the time came, it was a desperate scramble. Smooth stones, bark, leaves, anything that wouldn't cause a rash. Some unlucky souls even wiped with poisonous plants like hemlock or nettles, resulting in burns and days of agony. Knights, merchants, pilgrims, everyone faced the same dirty truth. Even royalty traveling between castles often used makeshift privies in tents, with servants tasked to clean up. Wiping on the road wasn't about comfort, it was survival. You didn't care what it was, so long as it was soft, dry, and didn't crawl away. Toilet paper, as we know it, didn't appear in Europe until centuries after the Middle Ages, but the journey toward it began with every desperate handful of straw, cloth, moss, or bark. For centuries, wiping was about survival. It wasn't about softness or hygiene. It was about not getting sick, not causing injury, and not being left behind. Everyone, from kings to peasants, faced the same undignified moment, with very different tools. In China, paper for wiping existed as early as the 6th century, but it didn't reach Europe until much later. For most medieval people, the idea of paper was laughable. Why waste something so valuable on your butt? It wasn't until the 19th century that toilet paper became widely available in the West. Until then, people wiped as they always had, with whatever they could find, wash, or throw away. The Middle Ages were dirty, dangerous, and deeply human. And through all the battles, plagues, and prayers, everyone still had to poop. And when they did, wiping was an adventure all its own. In the quiet halls of monasteries, monks lived lives of prayer, silence, and shared bathroom routines. Medieval monks had some of the best sanitation systems in Europe. Large monasteries featured communal latrines, long stone benches with multiple holes, often built over flowing water. It was practical, clean by medieval standards, and a strange place for quiet reflection. But what about wiping? Monks often used a gomph stick, a wooden rod with a cloth or sponge tied to the end. After use, the sponge was rinsed in a water channel or vinegar bucket and reused, sometimes by the next monk in line. It was efficient, humble, repetitive. Some orders had strict rules. Monks were allowed only a few wipes per visit, 3 according to certain records. Talk about pressure. Despite their cleanliness compared to peasants, even monks battled odors and infections. Cold stone, reused sponges, and limited baths didn't exactly make for ideal hygiene. Still, in a world of dirt and disease, monastic wiping might have been the cleanest rear-end experience you could hope for. Believe it or not, some medieval folks cared deeply about cleanliness, especially in cities with public bathhouses. These weren't luxurious spas, but for a small fee, commoners and nobles alike could bathe, socialize, and yes, wipe properly. Before or after doing their business, visitors might rinse off with buckets of water or cloths soaked in warm herbal infusions. In some places, people even used ceramic jugs with narrow spouts to gently pour water for a rinse, an early form of the bidet. Bath attendants might provide linen towels, though reused by multiple visitors. Herbs like sage, lavender, or mint were added for fragrance and mild disinfectant effect. Still, clean was relative, since water wasn't always changed, and many bathed in the same tub. Unfortunately, bathhouses declined after fears of disease, especially during the plague, spread. By the 15th century, many closed down, and people went back to wiping with straw and rags. For a brief window in medieval history, the cleanest butts in Europe may have belonged to those who visited bathhouses regularly. Medieval people didn't talk much about wiping, but their bodies paid the price. With rough materials, poor hygiene, and no clean water, many suffered from what we'd now call butt problems. Hemorrhoids were common, especially for those constantly squatting over filthy pits or sitting on cold stone. Infections, rashes, and sores could form from harsh wiping with straw, bark, or reused cloths. Some ailments were blamed on humours, imbalances in the body. Others were chalked up to curses or demons. Treatments ranged from herbal ointments to bloodletting. Some even believed stuffing herbs between the buttocks could heal sores or keep away evil spirits. Monks might apply salves made from honey and vinegar. Peasants, if they could afford it, used lard or sheep fat to soothe raw skin. But for most, pain was simply part of life. Without clean cloth, safe water, or the knowledge of germs, wiping wasn't just uncomfortable, it could lead to weeks of suffering. In a world where wiping hurt more than pooping, survival often meant enduring pain in silence and sitting very, very carefully. You'd think kings and queens had it easy, but even royalty couldn't escape the mess. High-born nobles didn't squat in fields. Castles had guardrobes, tiny cold stone rooms with wooden benches and a hole that emptied into a pit or moat below. Better than a bush? Sure, but far from luxurious. As for wiping, they used cloth, soft linen squares, wool, or specially kept rags. These weren't flushed away but washed and reused. Sometimes servants, called grooms of the stool, helped royals clean up. That's right. Their whole job was managing the monarch's bathroom needs. And in this world, the more status you had, the more wiping became a ritual. Fragrant herbs were added to cloths. Some nobles perfumed their rags or wiped with goose feathers. A few even used handfuls of hay sprinkled with rosewater. But it didn't always end clean. Castles stank, guardrobes backed up. Even kings suffered rashes, infections, and worse. Despite their riches, medieval nobles were still at the mercy of the same problem. Everyone pooped, and everyone had to wipe. Toilet paper didn't exist, not for kings, not for peasants. Instead, people used whatever was available: grass, moss, wool, cloth scraps, leaves, or even corn cobs. In castles, royalty might use soft linen or a servant's hand-rinsed cloth. In monasteries, monks sometimes wiped with a communal sponge on a stick, rinsed between uses in buckets of vinegar or cold water. Sanitary? Not really. Peasants? They grabbed whatever nature offered: pine cones, smooth stones, a handful of straw. In winter, frozen chunks of snow doubled as a cold and cleansing wipe. But none of it worked well, and most of it led to infections, rashes, and some truly horrifying smells. Baths were rare, underwear was reused, and toilet habits? Public, messy, and often ignored. Wiping wasn't just a routine, it was survival, and in a world without plumbing, you'd be shocked how much thought went into cleaning the one part no one wanted to talk about. In towns and villages, privacy wasn't a priority. Public latrines, if they existed, were little more than open pits surrounded by planks. No doors, no stalls, just a place to squat and hope for the best. Wiping in these places? Equally public. You'd bring your own rag, a bundle of straw, or nothing at all. Some pits had communal wiping materials, often sticks, leaves, or clumps of grass left in a corner. Hygienic? Not even close. People sometimes wiped with their bare hands and rinsed off in nearby streams. But since those same streams were often drinking sources, this practice caused widespread contamination. Children shared pits with adults. Men and women squatted near each other, especially in poorer districts. If the latrine was full, or simply too disgusting, many just found a quiet alley or field. The smell lingered through entire neighborhoods, and the risk of disease was constant. There was no such thing as modesty when it came to wiping. Only the desperate need to clean yourself before the next person took your spot. For the average medieval peasant, wiping wasn't a matter of comfort. It was about whatever was nearby, quick, rough, and disposable. After squatting behind a hedge, in a field, or over a dug hole, peasants reached for what nature offered. Clumps of straw were common, bundled and left near communal pits. Moss was soft, if you could find it. Leaves worked too, unless you accidentally picked a stinging nettle. Stones, shells, and even broken pottery made the list, though they weren't exactly gentle. There were no rules, just instincts. And if nothing else was available, your hand. Streams and rivers were often used to rinse off, but they were also where people fetched drinking water. Contamination was constant, disease spread easily, but for many, there were no other choices. There were no stalls, no privacy, and no real sanitation. Just you, the earth, and whatever wouldn't splinter or sting. Wiping your butt as a peasant wasn't just unpleasant, it was dangerous. And yet, it was probably still better than what some nobles endured.